I'm David Stichon, and this is a discussion video on my research presentation for History 512, History of the American Revolution. After conducting my research, I decided to do a presentation video and traveled to North Carolina and South Carolina to the various sites where this presentation takes place. I encourage you to refer to the abstract and also the video of the presentation after it is posted shortly. In 1763, the 7 Years' War ended for the European powers through a treaty signed in Paris, France. No one invited the North American Indians, so they continued without their French allies in a second combat phase known as Pontiac's War. After destroying or besieging all frontier British forts, the war parties spread across the backcountry, killing or capturing all the settlers or sending them in flight back to the Tidewater regions. King George III responded by issuing a proclamation declaring a royal line in 1763 along the eastern edge of the Appalachian ridges as the legal limit of settlement for the British colonies. The displaced settlers in the Middle Atlantic, as well as those planning to head west after the 7 Years' War, decided they could trek north into western New York or turn south into a strange territory. Heading west on the Forbes Road to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, they turned south on the Indian Warriors Path and skirted the Royal Line in the mountains into the southern Piedmont. The solid and dashed red line represents the main trail that became known as the Philadelphia Wagon Road, or simply the Great Wagon Road. The western fork from what is now Roanoke, Virginia, became the Wilderness Road, first into Tennessee and later into Kentucky. During the 1730s and 1750s, hundreds of Germans, English, and Scots traveled south looking for land. Each year, beginning in 1765 to 1775, over 10,000 Scots-Irish homesteaders walked annually along pack horses or wagons seeking cheap or free land. Many of the area immigrants lost their farms earlier in Great Britain or Europe as their landlords evicted them to raise sheep or flax for the growing cloth business. These settlers desired to own land that nobody could take from them. This wagon road remnant crosses Aaron Biggerstaff's land in Rutherford County, North Carolina. Captain Biggerstaff died from his wounds suffered at Kings Mountain while fighting as a Loyalist. The settlers traveled in small groups that essentially represented a congregation. Those gathered for protection usually belonged to dissenting religions: Presbyterians, Baptists, Moravians, Lutherans, Quakers, and other sects. This church is the restored Sugar Creek Presbyterian Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. The first minister, Alexander Craighead, followed George Whitefield across Virginia in 1740 and led his flock south in 1765. The same year, the North Carolina Regulator movement began at Sugar Creek within sight of this church. In 1765, the Reverend David Caldwell built his home in a church in Guilford County, North Carolina. Within 2 years, he raised the famous Log College. The stone foundation of the college is on the left. A North Carolina governor, many state legislators, and 55 Presbyterian ministers received advanced schooling at the Princeton of the South. The influx of dissenting Americans rapidly outnumbered the Highland Scot Jacobites who were transported into central North Carolina after the Battle of Culloden, and the Anglican English who traveled west from the coast by 1775. After the destruction of Loyalist forces at the Battle of Morris Creek in 1776, and defeating the Indian threat during the Cherokee War of 1776, an uneasy peace reigned over the South until 1780. Following the capture of Savannah and Charleston and the British victory at Camden, the Crown reestablished colonial control over the colonies of Carolina and Georgia. A threatening message sent by British Major Patrick Ferguson to the Over-Mountain settlers in what is now Tennessee to stay home resulted in thousands of frontiersmen crossing over to join militia from Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia to silence the boast. These forces tracked down Ferguson and his force of Loyalist Americans at Kings Mountain on October 7, 1780. The bloody battle resulted in hundreds of casualties, including the death of Ferguson. Both Thomas Jefferson and the British commander in North America, General Clinton, referred to the battle as the beginning of the end of the War for Independence. The Battle of Kings Mountain is interpreted and preserved at the National Battlefield Park on the core battlefield near Gaffney, South Carolina. The state of North South Carolina also maintains a large Kings Mountain State Park surrounding the national park that includes a replica of a 1780 frontier village. The battle is commemorated within the Overmountain Victory Trail National Park. There are dozens of marked sites, many that include small parks, along the trails of the Patriots to Kings Mountain in 4 states. One of the best local archives is the Genealogical Society of Old Tryon County, located in Forest City, North Carolina. A visit to the archives resulted in a planned appointment with the Rutherford County, North Carolina historian, Chivas Bradley. He provided a stack of records copies to support this presentation that includes this hand-drawn map detailing over 50 years of interviews and research on the Biggerstaff hanging tree on an outparcel of the Overmountain Victory Trail hidden on a country road. The 17.5-acre park includes a 2-sided kiosk, a frame 1850s home awaiting restoration, and a log house that was originally built before 1780. The gate is locked, and there are no employees present. Mr. Bradley's description locates the site of the hanging tree, graves, log house, and the remnant of the wagon road used by both Patriot and Loyalist forces in the days before and after the Battle of Kings Mountain. The shock of losing his American Loyalist riflemen and Northern provincial troops convinced British General Lord Charles Cornwallis to retreat south from North Carolina. 3 months later, Patriot General Daniel Morgan led an army of frontier riflemen, Piedmont militia, and a few Continentals into battle at Cowpens. In this complete victory, Morgan surrounded and captured British Colonel Banastre Tarleton's army of cavalry and Scottish light infantry. Cornwallis then destroyed his wagons and supplies and attempted to catch up with Patriot General Nathaniel Greene's army. While technically winning the Battle of Guilford Courthouse in North Carolina, the losses of troops and supplies forced Cornwallis to seek help from the Royal Navy on the Virginia coast. General George Washington, at the head of a combined American and French army, arrived and forced Cornwallis to surrender at Yorktown, Virginia, following a brief siege. The War for Independence essentially ended following this disastrous loss. Pontiac's War and the Royal Line of 1763 resulted in unexpectedly large numbers of second and third generation Americans changing their course into the frontier from west to south in the 10 years prior to the War for Independence. They dissented from their British immigrant neighbors in their religion and their politics. Their sudden influx into the southern Piedmont and mountains provided sufficient Patriot volunteers needed to defeat British regulars and Loyalist American forces in the Civil War fought after the Continental Army was destroyed in 1780. Secondary scholarship conducted by Lyman Draper continues to this day as more historians discover the role of the struggle in the South in winning the War for Independence. I'm David Stichon, and I hope you've enjoyed this video discussion and reflective video. Godspeed.